Few clubs have flown under the radar quite as well as Fulham in this season's Premier League. Perhaps it's because Nottingham Forest have darted up to 5th place, or because they're wedged between top 6 hopefuls like Brighton, Newcastle and Aston Villa. But it seems safe to assume that most fans of the English top flight are probably unaware of the fact that Fulham sit just 1 point of 3rd place in the league table. The fascinating thing about this impressive start to the new season is that when we take a look at the underlying numbers, Marco Silva's side are more than deserving of being at the top of the table with the big hitters. According to Understat, the London club are 5th in the league for total chances created, but even more remarkably, second only to Liverpool for total chances conceded to opposing teams. As such, the stats website actually suggests the Silva's side should be sitting above Manchester City, second only to Arne Slot's team in the league table. Obviously, Fulham aren't about to start challenging for top spots in the Premier League or competing for the Champions League qualification places, but these stats are a good example of how impressive Silva's team have been this season, and in many ways why the Portuguese manager has actually been one of the most underrated head coaches in the English top flight for a number of years now. Another way to look at the impressive job that Silva has done at Fulham this season is to consider the relatively tiny budget that the 47-year-old has to work with at the Premier League side, and how the Craven Cottage club have managed to punch above their weight due in part to Silva's remarkable talents as a manager. For example, when we consider that Silva's squad costs a total of €244.7 million in transfer fees, and the club currently have 18 points in this season's Premier League, it suggests that they have spent £13.6 million per point won. When we run those sums for every squad in the English top flight, we not only find that Fulham have the 3rd cheapest squad in the entire division, but that the return on their investments in the transfer window are the best in the division. As we can see in the table, Silva's side have seen their money go further than clubs like Brentford and Brighton, who are considered to be the smartest run clubs in the Premier League when it comes to spending the money wisely in the transfer market. Fulham are also spending considerably less than the likes of Bournemouth, Aston Villa, Newcastle and Tottenham when it comes to money spent in the hope of climbing up the league table, which again underlines the remarkable job that Silva is doing at Craven Cottage. What's even more remarkable about these figures is that since returning to the Premier League in 2022, Silva's teams have always been in the bottom 5 for the total cost of their squads. But when it comes to that cost per point won figure, Fulham have always been one of the most efficient operators in the division. In other words, Silva has ensured that Fulham continue to punch above their weight and steer well clear of the threat of relegation, even if the club hasn't always had the budget to ensure that itself. Even if we were to take Silva's financial miracles out of the equation, there's still plenty of evidence to point to the remarkable job he's done at Fulham over the course of the last 2.5 seasons. And perhaps the best way of doing that is to simply look at how many points the club have won in the Premier League since they won promotion in 2022. Remarkably, only 6 managers have amassed more points in the Premier League than Silva since the start of the 22-23 season. And as we can see in the table, Portuguese manager is bested only by managers at much bigger clubs with far bigger budgets, but does come out on top ahead of other managers with far bigger reputations than Silva, such as Thomas Frank, Roberto De Zerbi and Ange Postecoglou. Which in turn brings us to the entire point of this video. Under Silva's guidance, Fulham have not only established himself as a mid-table club, but continue to punch above their weight when it comes to outperforming bigger clubs often on the pitch. Obviously, plenty of people at the London club deserve immense credit for that, but it seems fair to say that none of it would be possible without Silva calling shots in the dugout. Perhaps Silva doesn't get the credit he deserves because he's at Fulham, but I suspect tactics are probably at play here. Unlike his counterparts, who are famous for very rigid styles of play and popular formations and tactics, Silva is a far more pragmatic manager. He doesn't really mind if Fulham play boring defensive football if it grinds out results. And while those tactics have undoubtedly seen Fulham climb up the league table over the course of the last 2.5 seasons, they don't typically garner much interest or indeed lead to many column inches or YouTube videos praising the Portuguese manager for his tactics. Having said all that, I suspect that Fulham fans will be delighted that rival fans or indeed chairmen of bigger Premier League clubs have taken little notice of their club going from strength to strength over the course of the last 4 years under Silva. The Craven Cottage club may in fact have the most underrated manager in the Premier League on their books, and they will undoubtedly be delighted that nobody seems to care.